Hey everyone, this is going to be a short presentation on the nutrition during pregnancy, which is chapter 4 in the textbook. I have linked this Google Slides link to Moodle, and I'll send it in the announcement where you're going to have this YouTube video linked as well. And there is going to be a spreadsheet, a Google Sheet that goes along with this lesson that'll ask you to fill out some sheets for questions that I'll also link in the announcement where you have this video. So before we get started, just wanted to remind you that we have your weight gain discussion forum that's due tonight at 11:59 p.m. So don't forget to complete that assignment. The instructions are in the discussion forum. We'll try this breathing exercises activity on Monday before our next class. So the plan for today is to participate in a Kahoot activity, which I have actually changed that link, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So you're going to have a Kahoot activity to introduce the chapter. We're going to review chapter 4, give a brief overview of chapter 4, and then at the end we're going to have a short case study scenario to apply some of this information that we learned. So moving on to this slide, I want you to follow this link. So stop the video, follow this link, and then participate in the Kahoot activity. It gives you an introduction to the material. There's some videos added in there for you to watch along with those. So you're able to participate in this Kahoot activity whenever I'm not giving it. It's a challenge versus a live game. So participate in this activity, and I'm going to go look over the answers. I will also link this in the announcement as well. So moving on to chapter 4. Again, this is nutrition during pregnancy. So thinking about what or the timeline of pregnancy, this is made up of 9 months. And this is the period of time in which we have the most intense period of growth and development during the human lifespan, which is pretty remarkable. And how the outcomes of the pregnancy are largely going to depend on several modifiable factors. So diet, weight status at time of conception, weight gain during pregnancy, all of these things can affect the outcomes for both mom and baby long term. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So what we see here is a diagram or the timeline of pregnancy. So we just mentioned pregnancy is about 9 months on average. And if you look, here is our time of conception, and you see the word term here. So full term on average is about 40 weeks. Full term can range between 38 and 42 weeks, but typically the average is 40 weeks. So pregnancy is divided into trimesters, which you see here. So there's 3 trimesters, and the importance with this is understanding that the age of a pregnancy can be a little bit different depending on the starting point by which we estimate it. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So we, in the last chapter, discussed the periconceptional period, which is 4 weeks before to 4 weeks after conception. Okay. We also talked about miscarriages. So we see that here miscarriages occur between 0 and 20 weeks following conception. If we have a death of the fetus or a stillbirth, that would occur after 20 weeks. So a loss of pregnancy before 20 weeks would be a miscarriage. The medical term would be a spontaneous abortion, whereas the loss of pregnancy beyond 20 weeks would be fetal death or stillbirth. In just a little bit, we'll talk about infant and maternal mortality rates as well, and some of that may surprise you a little bit. So what you see here, these definitions, embryo, fetus, neonate, and postnatal, these are descriptions of the infant along this timeline as well. So last thing I want to point out here is you see very preterm, preterm, full term, and post-term. So the age of the infant is measured in weeks, like we said, but just like we can have a range for full term, or we classify an infant as full term, we can also classify them as preterm, very preterm, or post-term. So important for you to know what these weeks are, because these are going to affect the needs of that infant once they are born, and if they are premature. Their needs might be a little bit different, as well as their this will affect the mortality rates as well. Thankfully, we have in recent decades increased the amount of neonatal intensive care units, and medicine has just improved to improve the outcomes of preterm infants as well. Okay, so looking at the infant mortality rate, what this really does is it gives us a general idea of the health and socioeconomic status of a population. So what we are going to discuss is how greatly the health of mom can impact the health of the pregnancy and the outcome of the pregnancy, but also the health of the infant. So that's how we can see that the general health could impact infant mortality rates, but also socioeconomic status. So what is available to moms, what types of resources and education is available to moms who are trying to conceive or who are pregnant. So we see that the mortality rate improves or decreases whenever these social concerns are improved, when we do a better job of controlling for infectious diseases, and whenever the availability of safe and nutritious food is higher. So just want you to take a look at the status of pregnancy outcomes. This chart is in your textbook. And what you're seeing is that we're comparing the rates in 1995 to the rates in 2013. So take a look at this, and I just invite you to see if there's any big differences or similarities. What I see here is that the rate of fetal deaths and mortality among infants has remained relatively stable or has improved from 1995 to 2013. But what we're seeing from 1995 to 2013 in maternal mortality rates is a drastic increase. So, what's going on with maternal mortality rates? I'd like you to pause and just think about that here. So look back to this slide. The maternal mortality rate means the amount of deaths per 100,000 live births. So the amount of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. And the maternal mortality rate is looking at the number of maternal deaths up to a year postpartum. So what do you think is going on with maternal mortality rate? Pause this and just think about that for a second. When you're ready, we're going to move on to this slide, and I'm going to show you guys this video. So in essence, what this video is telling us is that the health of mom before pregnancy and during pregnancy directly affects the outcomes of the pregnancy and the outcomes for mom and the newborn as well. So here again you can see how socioeconomic status and health-related disparities really can impact things like maternal and infant. So how exactly can pregnancy outcomes that are less desirable manifest? So we see things like preterm delivery, a higher infant mortality, and low birth weight. And these are the types of things that we're really looking at to think about how pregnancy outcomes are improving or declining. So infants who are either born with a low birth weight, are born early, have a higher risk of dying in their first year of life. 8% of births are low birth weight, but those 8% make up for about 66% of infant deaths. So that shows us that a low birth weight strongly influences infant mortality. About 11.4% are born preterm, and those account for a large number of infant deaths as well. So you can see that the combination of low birth weight and a preterm delivery really could increase infant mortality, or the risk of infant mortality. So with that said, what we want to do is improve the birth weight of newborns. So the desirable weight at birth is about 7 pounds and 12 ounces to 10 pounds. So that is about 3,500 to 4,500 grams. So this is the desirable weight to reduce infant mortality and morbidity. So mortality refers to death, while morbidity refers to any conditions or diseases that might compromise health. So when we see that infants are born at this ideal weight at 3,500 to 4,500 grams, or 7 pounds 12 ounces to 10 pounds, they're less likely to develop heart and lung diseases, diabetes, and hypertension. And as we know, these are the chronic diseases that really plague our nation and contribute to mortality rates among adults as well. So we talked about the Healthy People 2020 objectives in a previous lesson. We have Healthy People 2020 objectives specifically for pregnancy to help reduce the number of low birth weight, preterm delivery, and infant mortality, because we're seeing this connection with chronic diseases. If we can improve these numbers, at the earliest stage of life, then it's likely that we can reduce the amount of chronic disease in adults as well. So everything comes full circle here. So these are some examples of the 2020 Healthy People 2020 objectives related to pregnancy. So again, we're looking at reducing low birth weight and very low birth weight, preterm births, maternal mortality. These are all goals that eventually could help to improve the health of our nation as a whole. Okay, so I kind of alluded to this earlier, that we can assess the age of pregnancy in a couple of different ways depending on when we assess the start of the pregnancy. So there's something called gestational age and menstrual age. So just pause this video and think about what might be gestational age compared to menstrual age. When you're ready, you can restart the video. So what the difference is here is that gestational age is assessed from the date of conception. So when ovulation occurs and the egg is fertilized, that would be conception. Or we can measure the beginning of pregnancy by menstrual age, which would look at the beginning of the last menstrual period that the woman experienced. Most doctors are looking at the menstrual age, and that's why the average pregnancy is about 40 weeks. However, if we're looking at gestational age, it's going to be 2 weeks shorter at 38 weeks, because the date of conception most times on average would be 2 weeks after the woman's last period, because think back to the menstrual cycle. Typically you ovulate at day 14, and day 1 would be the beginning of your menstrual cycle. So that's why the gestational age is 38 weeks versus 40 weeks for the menstrual age. So during pregnancy, mom is going to experience physiological changes that alter her body composition and even alter metabolism and some physiological function to help support the pregnancy. So these are some examples of physiological changes that mom will experience. The important thing when we look at this table, which is in your book, it's table 4.5, the important thing is that all of these occurrences have to take place in a sequence. So on the far left, you're seeing the tissue that's being developed. The middle column, you're seeing the sequence. And then in that last column, you're seeing the gestational week of maximal rate of growth. So at what time is that growing at its maximum during pregnancy? So what you see first is that maternal plasma volume is developing, and what that does is increases blood flow, essentially, and increasing blood flow to the area that's going to support the fetus. So this is going to grow most rapidly at 20 weeks, and maternal nutrient stores are going to experience that maximal rate of growth at 20 weeks again too. So think back to that Kahoot. You might have gotten a little bit messed up on one of the questions, which asked about when women experience the greatest gain in growth or weight gain during pregnancy. The answer is actually about midway during pregnancy. And a lot of this has to do with the increase in our plasma volume or fluid. So we have to increase the amount of fluid and blood so that both mom and baby can be supplied with the nutrients and oxygen and blood that is needed for it to thrive. So the nutrient stores are important because in the early stages of pregnancy, mom is going to sort of set the stage to be able to support the baby by storing some nutrients for the baby to be able to rapidly grow and develop, which we'll talk about in just a second. But once those take place, then in around 30 or 31 weeks, the placenta really is going to start to grow and develop. And that, in combination, the fetus is going to be able to grow and develop with that. And then finally, we're going to get more blood flow to the uterus, and then the fetus will rapidly grow in size and weight at week 37. So what I briefly just mentioned about how mom is able to sort of store some nutrients to support the rapid growth and development in those earlier stages of pregnancy, this is something we would refer to as an anabolic phase of pregnancy. So anabolic and catabolic are the two main forms of human metabolism. In anabolism, or an anabolic phase, we're looking at building up or storing, whereas in a catabolic phase, we're looking at breaking down or releasing energy from something. So this next slide shows us the early pregnancy. So between 0 and 20 weeks, mom is in that anabolic phase. So like we said, we have to expand blood volume and fluid to help to support the early growth and development of the fetus and the placenta. And on top of that, there's going to be this buildup of fat and nutrients and glycogen stores that is going to help to support the growth and development of the fetus. On top of that, we have to grow the placenta, Mom's appetite's going to be increased. She'll likely be in a positive calorie balance, which means she's consuming more calories than what she's expending, and she's likely gaining weight here. And an increase in some anabolic hormones, which we'll talk about. And then in the later half of pregnancy, mom enters in this catabolic phase, where the fat and nutrient stores that she has kind of reserved are going to be broken down so that the fetus can be supported with those nutrients, and that they're readily available for the rapid growth and weight gain that it will experience in the later half of pregnancy. So in this catabolic phase as well, we're seeing an increase in the serum glucose levels and triglycerides and fatty acids, with a decrease in liver glycogen stores. So at this phase, mom may experience higher blood glucose levels, and sometimes they could be so high that they would have been diagnosed with gestational diabetes. So typically around this time, mom would go in for a gestational diabetes test to see if her blood glucose levels are running higher than normal. And some women are surprised whenever they're diagnosed with gestational diabetes because they feel like they're very healthy and they've always had a good, healthy diet. But sometimes the hormones during pregnancy, because of these shifts in metabolism and hormones, they really can affect blood glucose levels. And mom may not be really doing a whole lot that's causing that to happen. So at this time, mom is likely to have an increased appetite, and food intake might decline a little bit as she approaches delivery. But all of this is to support the fetus and how much it grows, especially in the second half of pregnancy. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the increase in blood volume and fluid that moms experience during pregnancy. And with that, they may experience swelling because that extra fluid can accumulate in the extracellular areas. It can also be caused by hormonal changes too. But because of this, some moms may feel like they need to limit sodium intake because, ever think if you went to a crawfish boil and you had all that really salty crawfish and everything that was in there, your fingers kind of get swollen, your feet might swell a little bit. But it's actually important that moms or pregnant women don't restrict sodium, because that blood volume is necessary to support the fetus. Okay, and this is just a glance at the hormones involved during pregnancy. As you see, in early pregnancy, we have a spike in HCG, and that's the hormone that pregnancy tests are looking at. And again, we see the importance of progesterone during pregnancy as well. So we've kind of briefly mentioned how metabolism changes during pregnancy. We're going to take a look at the specific nutrients. So some of these changes in metabolism for pregnant women can be seen in the earliest stages, even just a few weeks after conception. And the whole purpose of this is to make sure that those nutrients are going to be available to the rapidly growing fetus exactly whenever they're needed. Because the kind of common saying that that baby is going to take everything that it needs and mom won't be spared isn't true. So mom is going to be taken care of first, and baby is sort of second. So the metabolism is able to shift so that baby can be taken care of by putting mom into this anabolic phase early in pregnancy to store some of those nutrients to help that fetus to grow and develop really, really rapidly. So on this slide, we're looking at some changes in carbohydrate metabolism. Just like for most of our organs, glucose is going to be the preferred fuel for the fetus. And remember, glucose is a carbohydrate. So in early pregnancy, there are higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, and that's going to stimulate insulin. Insulin is that hormone that helps us to decrease blood sugar. Okay, so we have to remember that whenever insulin is working, that blood sugar that's hanging out in the blood is pushed into cells. Okay, so the actual role of insulin is to help the sugar in the blood go into cells so that it can be broken down for energy. So in early pregnancy, this increase in estrogen and progesterone causing an increase in insulin is allowing for more glucose to be pushed into the cells. And if we don't need all of that glucose at that time, we're going to be able to store that glucose as glycogen and fat. Okay. Later in pregnancy, we have more of HCS and prolactin, and that actually inhibits the conversion of glucose to glycogen and fat. So what you see here in early pregnancy, whenever we are creating glycogen and fat from glucose, that would be an example of an anabolic pathway. We're building it. Whereas in late pregnancy, we're reducing that anabolic pathway. We're not allowing the glucose to be converted to glycogen and fat as readily. So that kind of shows us how hormones can increase blood glucose beyond normal levels, and this is known as the diabetogenic effect of pregnancy. So it can kind of put you in this state of insulin resistance, this increase in HCS and prolactin. So this is why some moms may experience gestational diabetes at when they don't typically have any issues before. But there's a little bit of research that suggests that women who have gestational diabetes tend to be a little insulin resistant even before the pregnancy. Okay, so the previous slide we talked about the changes in carbohydrate metabolism, so here we're looking at the changes in fat metabolism. So in the first half of pregnancy, we're going to increase the amount of fat stores that are accumulated, and that is to essentially provide an energy reserve for the developing fetus. And again, that can a lot of times come from us ourselves being able to convert glucose into glycogen and fat. So we're going to store that fat as an energy source in the earlier half of pregnancy. And then in the last half of pregnancy, we're going to enhance the mobilization of those fatty acids. So those can be used as energy for the developing fetus in the last half of pregnancy. So here again we see that this accumulation of fat stores is an anabolic pathway, whereas the fat mobilization in the latter half of pregnancy is a catabolic pathway. At this time, you can see blood lipid levels increase, but this can kind of be a good thing because the cholesterol that's circulating in those can be used for synthesizing steroid hormones for the fetus, for cellular membrane formation, nerve impulses, all of these things that are important for the development of the fetus. Okay, and finally, because of the rapid growth, especially for infant bone formation, calcium is going to be needed in larger amounts, and mom's metabolism, mineral metabolism, adjusts to this by increasing absorption of calcium in the intestines whenever she eats something. and also increasing the mobilization of calcium. So this is a change in calcium metabolism to increase how much she actually absorbs, so that there is a little bit extra calcium hanging out for her to build the bones of the infant. And like I said earlier, it's normal for women to have a lot of fluid gain, and that is to support the mom, the placenta, and the baby. So restricting sodium during pregnancy could potentially be harmful because of this. So anytime you are talking about human physiology, sodium follows water, water follows salt. So if you reduce sodium, you likely could reduce the fluid volume, and that can be harmful. Alright, so what is the placenta? This is a picture that's taken out of your textbook that you can look at right here. But the placenta is sort of the place where substances and nutrients can be exchanged between mom and baby. The important thing here is that the bloodstreams don't mix. They can diffuse across the membrane, but the blood of the baby and the blood of the mom do not mix. So you see here where it's going out and where we're diffusing in. These are going to be separate. So these are a few of the functions of the placenta. They actually produce some hormones and enzymes. They're important for nutrient and gas exchange, like we said. So this is how the baby is supplied with nutrition during pregnancy from mom, and also how they're supplied with oxygen and how they transfer out carbon dioxide as well. The placenta is also important for removing waste from the fetus as well. If you have any questions, you can ask those in the Google Sheet that I've linked, and I'll be able to answer those I can probably do like a announcement on Moodle to answer those questions. Okay, so we are going to do a short case study. So Heidi is 28 years old. She just found out that she's pregnant. She weighs 134 pounds, and she is 5'6". So last class we talked about estimating BMI, or calculating BMI, and in the videos that you should have watched on the Kahoot game, you should have somewhat of an idea of how much weight Heidi should gain based on that. So here, I want you to go to the Google Sheet and add your answer to case Q1 for Heidi's BMI, and how much weight she should gain. So I'll go ahead and write case study Q1. That should be Q1. Alright, case study Q2 is how will Heidi's calcium, iron, and folate needs change during pregnancy, and why? So again, I want you to go answer these questions on the Google Sheet that I've shared. And then case study question 3 is Heidi tells her dietitian, my mother told me I can eat as much as I want during pregnancy because I'm eating for two, the baby and myself. Is that true? How would you respond? So I want you to answer that in case Q3 on the Google spreadsheet. Again, if you have any questions, please enter those in the spreadsheet as well. So finally, don't forget that your weight gain discussion forum is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. If you have any questions, please put those in the Google spreadsheet, or you can email me individually and I will answer all of those questions for the class as a whole.